Looking at your life as a journey gives you an entirely new perspective on all your experiences, because it puts things in the context of a narrative, of a story of many chapters, like a film of many frames. So whether it's beautiful times or very challenging and difficult times, it's all part of your journey. And the way the Hasidic masters put it is that every journey, even the descent, even when we fall, is all part of the ascent, of being elevated to greater heights. We now arrive at the final and seventh part of the 7-part series called the 42 Journeys of Life. The end of wandering, when the journey reveals its purpose. Taking all the steps and all the legs of the journey until now. From the moment we're born, through our childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, middle age, old age. We've reviewed and explored each leg of this journey. And it's your journey, my journey, every one of our journeys. All reflected in the 42 journeys that the Jewish people took in the wilderness, from Egypt to the Promised Land. And now we come to that conclusion. So please join me as we conclude the 39th through 42nd journey, 39th through 42nd journey. But we're not concluding the journey of our lives. We now go empowered with these insights to be able to apply it to wherever you are in your life. Welcome to part 7, the last and final part of the 7-part series, the 42 Journeys of Your Life. The end of wandering, when the journey reveals its purpose. This program is dedicated by Joanne Schwartz in loving memory of her husband Shlomo Michael, Stephen Michael Schwartz. The 42 journeys documented in the Torah and the Bible, when the Jews left Egypt, traveling through the wilderness all the way to the Promised Land, Baal Shem Tov tells us that those 42 journeys are the 42 journeys of each one of our lives. In the past 6 parts of this series, we've gone through journey number 1 through journey number 38. We now come to that final few journeys. You can say few legs of this journey. Journeys 39 through 42. It's been in chronological order. That's how life works. We begin from birth, through childhood, through adolescence, teenage years, young adult, middle age, and old age. But like every journey, a journey has a purpose. It's going toward a destination. Here the destination is the Promised Land. And when you look at your life from that perspective, that it's a journey, instead of disjointed, fragmented pieces, it changes the entire context, because then it's a story. It's a narrative of many chapters. And every part of the narrative is going toward the Promised Land. Leaving Mitzrayim, leaving Egypt, which represents all the constraints, all the limitations, all the unactualized potential that's caught up in the dire straits or the distresses and challenges of life. And the journey is taking us to the Promised Land. The Promised Land of each one of our great potential. So let's get into it. Last journey, the journey 38, which was addressing quite difficult situations, the challenges, especially in the last stages of our life's journey on earth. But all, as the Hasidic masters tell us, leading us to greater elevation. A very powerful expression, that even the descents in life, meaning descent, D-E-S-C-E-N-T, when we go down for whatever reason, we fall, there's a setback, a difficulty, a loss, is all in order to elevate to a higher place. Again, big picture. It's all part of one journey. So we're now going to cover the last stages of life's journey on earth, and in general, the final stages of history as we arrive to the Promised Land. So, these final 4 journeys, which we're going to be speaking about now, are a type of summation, you can say, of the entire spectrum of life's experiences, which can be described as a confluence of extremes. On one hand, we are exhausted and worn down from the grueling journeys in the wilderness, with all its pains and difficulties. On the other hand, we can also feel deep appreciation, the satisfaction that is only possible after waging battles, that we have made it through the arduous journeys. Not only have we come out intact, but we can see the fruits of our labor, and above all, we now can understand that all the challenges throughout the 42 journeys were about sublimating and transforming the harsh wilderness and preparing the ground to enter the Promised Land. So with that, we move from, they left journey number 39, they left the passes and camped in Divon Gad. And we discussed what those passes are and the difficulties that presents. But now we move to Divon Gad, journey number 39. What does Divon Gad mean? It means a place of good fortune. Gad was one of the 12 tribes. Born to Zilpah, after Leah saw that she was no longer having children, so Leah exclaimed, Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov means good fortune. Mazel Tov has come. And she thus named the new child Gad. So Gad is connected to good fortune. The children of God were also powerful people who were triumphant in their battles conquering the Promised Land. As they went to battle our enemies, who did not want to give up the land that belonged to the Jewish people, they decided to occupy. So there were battles, and they waged those battles, and they were successful. As it says, God, a troop shall press upon him, but he shall press upon their heel, meaning he'll be victorious in battle. And Rashi, the famous commentary, interprets, God, troops will troop forth from you, from him, I should say, over the Jordan River in order to conquer the land. And he will triumph without losing a man. That's pretty big, not losing one casualty. There's another element to get to Divon Gad, that it was located on Zered Brook, where the decree that the Jewish people would die in the desert came to an end. After the slander of the Promised Land of Israel, the Jews were unfortunately caught up in that libel. So there was a decree that they would die in the desert. You don't want to go in the Promised Land? Fine. Your children will go, but not you. When did that decree end? That was Divon Gad. So it was celebrated as a day of good fortune as well, because it meant the past was erased or atoned for, and we're now ready to move forward. And they turned the day into a holiday. The holiday of the 15th of Av. The 15th of Av, the Talmud tells us, was one of the greatest holidays. There were no holidays in Israel like the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur, because it came after the destruction of the 9th of Av, and that's when the Jewish people protested against the Promised Land. But the 15th of Av was their atonement, the day of good fortune. But it goes more than, the plot thickens. The Zohar says that the conjunction of the two letters, Gimel and Dalet, God in Hebrew, is two letters, Gimel and Dalet, indicates the issuing forth of troops and hosts, Gimel giving and Dalet receiving. It's a form of exchange. That river, which perennially flows from Eden, supplies the needy, and therefore many hosts and many camps are sustained from here, and this is the significance of the name God, one producing and giving, and the other collecting and taking. Quote, unquote, from the Zohar. So God denotes the power of Gomel Dalim, sustaining the needy, helping the poor and downtrodden, transforming light to dark. Correction, transmitting light to dark places. That's Divon God. That's the place we're arriving at. So you see what's happening here. That after all the journeys, we're coming to a place where we are reaping the final rewards of our challenges. Divon God then represents the good fortune stage in our lives when we have triumphed in our battles and prevailed in dire circumstances, and now arrive at the end of the process. This good fortune, however, comes with mixed feelings. It is definitely worthy of celebration, but at the same time, we also cannot ignore the hard battles and sad deaths up till this point. Those prices were paid to get here. And that Moses and the generation that left Egypt would not enter at that point the Promised Land. It would be their children. Yet their children will, and they will ultimately be reunited with Moses and his generation, thus redeeming all the pain. So we're not talking about just good fortune in a vacuum. We're talking about it in context of life. So anyone that looks back at their life and you see the prices you paid, and yes, you see the pains and the difficulties and mistakes that were made, and even transgressions, but at the same time, you see that it all led to a great celebration. So it's realistic. It's not an escape. You understand what it cost to get here, but you are appreciating the dividends. Elijah the prophet, who was called Mavaser Tov, the bearer of good news, is from the tribe of God. Elijah will be the one that announces the good news that after our backbreaking journeys, Mashiach and the redemption have finally arrived. And it's interesting, when we read the last chapter in the book of Numbers, where it sums up all the 42 journeys, including this one, Divon God, it's always in the 3 weeks. And very often the 9 days as well, the saddest days that reflect some of these terrible events that happen, including the slander of the Promised Land, including the destruction of the temple. But at the same time, we're also being told the good news that all of that will lead to the redemption and the building of the third temple. In personal terms, Divon God, therefore, is the life stage when we recognize and acknowledge the blessings of good fortune in our lives. Despite all the setbacks and struggles, notwithstanding the desolate passes from where they came in the previous journey, we have refined and elevated the wilderness and have arrived with many gifts. We have learned to sustain and nurture Gimel, the barren and the impoverished, Dalet. So God, Gimel Dalet, is bringing light into dark places. Okay, let us now move to journey number 40. They left Divon God and camped in Almon Divotaima. What is Almon Divotaima? It's translated as hidden sweetness. The place where the well was concealed from them because they forsook the Torah, which is compared to sweet pressed figs. That's what some of the commentaries explain. Some say that this place had many streams where chestnuts and figs grew. Hidden sweetness. You see the message? The mystics explain that this is a state of concealment. Alman from the root helam, from the word hidden, referring to the overwhelming existential loneliness that we are all subject to in our lives. How often do we wonder, am I alone in this world? Does God hear my prayers? In fact, however, this feeling of isolation, as real as it may seem to us, is only due to our limited perception. And here we'll take a lesson from King David. King David teaches us a very important lesson that will help us understand this stage. When David was escaping the wrath of King Saul, he tells his dear friend Jonathan, who is the son of Saul, that as the new moon arrives, he will go hide in the field. Very powerful story. Because King Saul was jealous of him and thought he was a threat to his throne. So he'll go hide in the field. They then agree upon a sign to determine whether David must continue to hide from the pursuing Saul or he can come out of hiding. Meaning that Saul was his wrath had passed. When David's seat will be empty during the meal of the new moon and Saul will inquire about his whereabouts, Jonathan should gauge from his father's reaction whether Saul still wants to kill David or he will leave him be in peace. Once Jonathan determines Saul's state of mind, he will come out to the field where David was hiding. I will shoot 3 arrows, he says, as if aiming at a mark. And behold, I will send a lad saying, go find the arrows. If I say expressly to the lad, look, the arrows are on the side of you, get them. Then come, for it's safe for you. And as God lives, there is nothing to fear. This is Jonathan's sign to David. But if I say to the youth, look, the arrows are beyond you, go your way. For God has sent you away. And concerning the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, God be between you and me forever. So our connection will remain. Obviously, he had to hide his intentions because his father was watching. So that was the sign that he gave. Once Jonathan saw how his father Saul's anger had not subsided, and he wanted to kill David more than ever, in the morning, quote, Jonathan went out to the field at the time prearranged with David, and a little lad came with him. He said to the lad, run, find the arrows which I shoot. The lad ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. When the lad reached the place where Jonathan had shot the arrow, Jonathan said to him, is not the arrow beyond you? And Jonathan cried after the lad, hurry, be quick, do not stay. So Jonathan's lad gathered up the arrows and came to his master, but the lad did not know anything. Only Jonathan and David knew what the sign was. As soon as the lad had gone, it's all part of the quote from the book of Samuel 1. David came out of the place toward the south and fell on his face to the ground, bowing 3 times. They kissed one another, meaning they were saying goodbye to one another, and wept together until David acceded. Then Jonathan said to David, go in peace, seeing that we have both sworn in God's name, saying, God be between me and you and between my offspring and yours forever. So what is the deeper meaning of this story? And we'll see how this connects to this journey number 40. So the Holy Arizal, Rav Isaac Luria, who is actually his yahrzeit, is also in this period of time. On the 5th of Av, in a very moving fashion, he explains this account that's the story of our lives, especially during the darker years of exile, when we're facing challenges, and how it leads us to freedom and redemption. David's concealment symbolizes the hiding from that we all have to go into from the forces that want to harm us. We all have forces that can harm us. It could be physical forces, spiritual forces, psychological, emotional. So we go into hiding. There's a concealment that is necessary to protect ourselves. Jonathan represents the voice of hope and clarity. I will shoot 3 arrows as if aiming at a mark, and behold, I will send a lad, saying, go find the arrows. The 3 arrows represent the sharp tools we use to hit our mark and refine the material universe. If I say expressly to the lad, look, the arrow's on the side of you, get them, then it's safe for you. We have reached a point that reflects the level when we have reached a point when our arrows have integrated matter and spirit, and we no longer have to hide our souls from predators. In other words, we come to a point where our lives have been refined, and we have nothing to fear. But then Jonathan says, but if I say, and here the verse uses the word elam. Elam is another word for young man, a young lad. Not nar, elam. That's from the word concealment, denoting a state of concealment. The arrows are beyond you. Go your way. That means that God has unfortunately sent you to exile. The time has not come yet to come out from concealment. Sadly, you must remain in hiding, and the concealment may even intensify due to the sorry state of a corrupt world. So as you see here, these journeys are far more elaborate in the sense they reflect and sum up life itself. But the story does not end on this low note. The verse continues. And here's the Arizal's powerful interpretation. But the lad did not know anything. Why is that relevant for us to know? Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. The young, immature lad cannot see through the concealment. He cannot discern that God remains with us even in the darkest moments. So, ostensibly, when you look at the surface level, you see concealment. David has to run off. The arrows are beyond us. But Jonathan and David knew the matter, the truth of the matter, that we are never alone. Even when we are in hiding, God be between you and me forever. So even in the concealment lies tremendous connection. Armed with this faith and confidence, the story concludes that David and Jonathan embraced and cried together. David came out of a place toward the south and fell on his face, bowing 3 times. They kissed one another and wept together. These are the outpouring prayers and tears we shed, beseeching God to deliver us from hiding, because we don't want to remain in hiding. Prayers that will be fulfilled with the coming of Mashiach ben who? David. Mashiach stems from the house of David. Until David exceeded and achieves greatness. So the goal is ultimately that greatness. So now let us go back to this 40th journey. Almon Divaltema. This connection gives us the power to transcend the pain and the loneliness, knowing, as Jonathan said to David, go in peace, seeing that we have both sworn in God's name, God be between me and you and between my offspring and yours forever. The 40th journey, Almon Divaltema, refers to this existential concealment, which captures one of the greatest challenges throughout all of the 42 journeys in the wilderness. Will we be able to hold on to the faith and recognize that even in the arid desert, we are traveling toward the promised land? It's holding on to that vision, to the destination. It tells us, this 40th journey, that within the hidden lies enormous reservoirs of sweetness. Remember, it's translated as hidden sweetness, this location. Hidden sweetness, which we can access by not being myopic children, the lad that did not know anything, but exerting ourselves to see beyond the shrouds and know the matter, recognize the deeper truth within it all. So this journey thus reflects the stage in our lives, usually one that comes with later years, or when we are about to reach the end of a long process, the seasoning, the experience that we have, after we've paid our dues, when we are faced with this challenge like a spiral staircase, as we get closer to the summit, to the destination, we must make one final 180-degree turn, which utterly obliterates and conceals the destination, though we are only one step from it. Don't be deceived by the dark moment. See it through. And here we go to journey 41. They left Almon Divaltema and camped in the Avarim mountains in front of Nebai. Nebai, you may recall, is the mountain of the Nebai, or Nebai as some pronounce it, where Moses ultimately goes to end his life. Now they arrive to the Avarim mountains, which Moses climbs to see the promised land before he prepares to die and be gathered up to your people. So we're coming to the end of the story. This is the final journey in all our lives. Actually, the next to final one. We're still in the 41st. But we're coming to the conclusion. The transition from life to death. Death obviously is terrible. It symbolizes an end, a disconnection. We associate it with a finality and permanence. We no longer can see and touch, speak and laugh with our beloved ones, whose souls have departed this plane. Even with deep faith in the soul's immortality and continued eternal journey, death is absolutely devastating. Even if the soul can see us, we cannot see it. No one should ever know of this pain, but those that have experienced it know exactly what I'm saying. Yet, the journey does go on. It's not over. As sad as Moses' death was, symbolizing that the world remains in concealment, the mountain range is called Avarim, which means passing through. It's a transition. It's not an end. It's passing through. Or another way to translate it is opposite of, meaning me'ever, on the opposite side of something. Because Avarim was where they stood opposite the crossing point to Jericho. Remember, they're coming closer to the east bank of the Jordan River, rather, and standing across opposite the point of Jericho. Others explain that from this peak one could see the burial places of Aaron and Miriam. So different ways to understand it, but it's all understanding that it's not over. It may be concealed, but it's passing through, standing opposite of something. You still know that there's something more to come. Death is also a journey, a passage to another place. Though Moses went up to the mountain and did not enter the promised land, his legacy remains eternal. And the next generation, trained and inspired by Moses, did indeed enter the land, led by Moses' loyal student and successor Joshua. And here we are today, still telling the story. Here we are thousands of years later, and we're telling the story, remembering and reliving Moses' life and his teachings. This is who we are. Can you say the journey ended? So yes, it went through a transition, a painful transition, but here we are to tell about it. Here too we have the paradox of death coupled with knowing that this is a passageway, Avarim, and the journey continues. Together with the sadness of Moses' farewell, we are told that he climbs the Avarim mountains to look at the promised land, a gaze of a holy man that actually affected and helped refine the land, and that Moses' final passage was a Nevoy, which consists of two words, Nun, Boy. Nun is 50, Boy, within. Nevoy refers to the 50th gate of wisdom that Moses attained as he climbed the mountain. This is explained by the Maggid of Mizrich. So the journey to the Avarim mountains in front of Nevoy teaches us about our own transitions, especially considering that everyone has a small Moses within. Moses is a microcosm. And the challenge we have to balance the antithetical feelings death evokes about the demise of one stage, leading and birthing another. And now we come to the final and last journey, journey 42. They left the Avarim mountains and camped Ba'arves, Moav, the west plains of Moav, on the river Jordan. Yarden Yerecha, it actually says. The Jericho Jordan, meaning the Jericho section where the Jordan River is. There they camped along the Jordan from Beth Hayashimos to Avel Shittim on the west plains of Moav. So this is a rather longer description, and here's how it's explained. What is Arvis Moav? It means the darkness. Arvis from the word Erev, evening, night and darkness of Moav. So evening, the night, is always a darker state. And Moav is considered to be a very negative place. That was a place that opposed the Jewish people. The final, harshest, and most difficult of all the journeys in the wilderness. That's what this stage is at. So even though they're right about to go into the promised land, but remember, we turn our back on the spiral staircase. There is that one final, the darkness before the dawn is strongest. Arvis, however, also means sweetness. Interesting in Hebrew, Erev is dark, is evening, dark, but it also means Arev, sweetness, referring to the transformation of bitter to sweet and darkness to light, which we discussed earlier as well. The same dual application applies to Moav. Moav in Hebrew is me'av. Me'av meaning from a father. What is that spiritually? What's the spiritual significance of that? This can have a dual manifestation. A father in the positive sense, a source of sanctity, or it can be the father of evil. You can father two different things, good or evil. In Kabbalistic terms, Av is Chachma. Chachma is the first of the 10 spheres. It's the first spark, that flash of conscious wisdom, which can either be Chachma of Kedusha, can be conceiving something of holiness, positive energy, or Chachma and Klippa of negative energy. And these two meanings actually converge in the word Moav. Ruth came from Moav. Ruth was the grandmother of whom? David. So she ultimately gives birth to David, who ultimately would be the ancestor of Mashiach. And she was the ancestress of King David, and hence of Mashiach. But she also comes from Moav. She was she was coming from the negative. So it's a transformation of the dark to the light. Thus, camping in Arvis Moav sums up the purpose of all the 42 journeys, to transform darkness into light, bitterness into sweetness. In describing this final journey, the verse continues, on the Jericho Jordan, Yarden Yeriche. This refers to the level of Mashiach, Yarden Yeriche, Moirach V'dayin. Yarden Yeriche has a combination of two words, that he would judge through smell, meaning he would sense, he would have that intuition. The Jordan, which is Yarden in Hebrew, is a channel that carries from one to another. It's like a conduit, an interface. And is also the lock key to Israel. That was considered that if you can conquer Jordan, Yericho, you're able to conquer the whole of Israel. That's why it was a key boundary city. The great revelation of light that is derived from the darkness of Moav. So all this is captured in this 42nd journey. Think again. They left the Avarim mountains, camped in Arvos, Moav, on the Jericho Jordan. And then it continues. There they camped along the Jordan from Beit HaYeshomes to Aval Shittim on the west plains of Moab. From the wasteland, Yeshimon is wasteland, to the desolate plain on the dark plains of Moab. This final 42nd journey is the final stage of our life's journey, which both sums up our lives as well as prepares us for the transition to the next generation, the one that will enter the promised land. It thus describes the summation of all our life's work, the transformation of a dark and difficult life, setting the stage for the next generation of Jordan Jericho, the messianic redemption. So both on a personal level and a macrocosmic level, it captures that final transition. Our long journey through the wilderness of life and all of its 42 journeys, I would say all 42 stages and legs, is meant in order for us to tame and refine the world and transform it. This in turn gives us the power to enter the promised land, to self-actualize and reach our land of promise. Because that's the ultimate goal. All the 42 journeys are about freeing ourselves and transcending the constraints and limitations, Mitzrayim, of our material existence, which conceals the divine, subduing and sublimating the harsh wilderness of selfish existence. and discovering the promised land, a life of harmony between body and soul. Just as the final journey was the exodus out of Egypt, just as the first journey was the exodus out of Egypt, Mitzrayim, each of us begins our life journey with birth, the liberation of the fetus from the confines of the womb, where it can develop and become an independent force that has the power to transform the world. The final journey brings us to the threshold of the total transformation of the universe into a holy and promised land. Thus, all the journeys reflect a dual quality. On one hand, they are challenging and difficult experiences. On the other, they all carry great promise and potential, as they allow us the opportunity to refine each of the respective 42 journeys, all leading us to the promised land. This paradox is amplified in the final 42nd journey, the summation of them all, which captures and encompasses the entire paradox of life. On one hand, the deep darkness, on the other, the power that it gives us to transform it into tremendous light, unprecedented. This, my friends, is the conclusion of the 42 journeys. They say that awareness is half the cure of every problem. The awareness of the journeys that we travel on, even before we get there, helps us understand, anticipate, and then to navigate. That's a great gift. That's why it's so important to understand these journeys. Each of us will come to that leg of the journey that's appropriate for our age, for our experiences. But it's good to know, not just good to know, it's critical to know the entire picture. And many commentaries talk about the deeper meaning, how this reflects also history, the journeys throughout history, and that all the work that we've done and all our challenges through all the ordeals that we've gone through, wherever our ancestors lived and the challenges they faced, after thousands of years of millions and billions of good deeds, the world is refined to the point where we are at the threshold of the promised land. So in that sense, the 42nd journey leads us into what we call the personal and global final redemption. A world which will be devoid of war and famine and injustice and crime and violence. A world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. So my friends, travel well. The best is yet to come. Even if you're experiencing something that may be a setback, it may not be so pleasant, the best is yet to come. It's been a great honor to be able to present these 42 journeys. I hope they help you in your odyssey, in your life's journeys. As always, please share this with anyone you see fit. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, to our offerings. And I'd always love to hear your feedback, thoughts, and comments. This has been Simon Jacobson, meaningfullife.com. We also have the simonjacobson.ai digital twin that you can have conversations with me, basically with all the content that I've created and continue to create. Be blessed and be well. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Meaningful Life Center. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at meaningfullife.com/donate.